Picture a nation gripped by fear, oppressed by a powerful enemy with seemingly no hope of escape. For 20 long years, the Israelites suffered under the brutal rule of the Canaanites. Their iron chariots patrolled the land, and the cries of the people seemed to go unheard. But in the midst of this darkness, God was preparing an unexpected deliverer. A woman named Deborah, chosen to lead Israel at a time when all seemed lost. Her story is one of faith, courage, and a reminder that no situation is beyond God's power to redeem. Deborah wasn't your typical warrior. She was a judge, a prophetess, and most importantly, a woman of deep faith. As you journey through her story, you'll discover how God can use anyone, no matter their circumstances, to accomplish his purposes. Israel's battle against Sisera was more than just a military victory. It was a triumph of faith over fear, of obedience over doubt. Are you ready to be inspired by a leader who trusted in God against all odds? Israel, in the days of Deborah, was in a state of despair. The nation had turned away from God, and as a result, had fallen into the hands of its enemies. The powerful Canaanite army, led by the cruel King Jabin and his commander Sisera, brutally oppressed the people. Fear had spread throughout Israel, and it seemed there was no way out. The oppression they faced was not just political. It was also a reflection of their spiritual distance from God. The Canaanites had a terrifying advantage: iron chariots, a powerful weapon that Israel could not match. For 20 long years, the Israelites suffered under this merciless regime, their strength and faith weakening as time passed. They cried out to God, but the answer seemed delayed. The future looked bleak, and many had given up hope for deliverance. Yet, in the midst of their suffering, a cry began to rise. The people, desperate and without hope, finally turned their hearts back to God. Their pleas for help reached the heavens, and as had happened before, God heard them. But this time, the answer would come in an unexpected way. A woman named Deborah was about to change the nation's destiny. Unlike other judges who had been raised to save Israel, Deborah was not a warrior but a prophetess. Her role was more spiritual than military, and she was known for her wisdom and ability to judge disputes among the people. She was an unusual leader called for an extraordinary mission. The period of oppression was nearing its end. The people didn't know it yet, but deliverance was near. Sisera's cruelty and the Canaanite oppression would not last forever. God was preparing the stage for a miracle. He chose Deborah, a leader who fully trusted in his word, to lead Israel to victory, and her story was just beginning. Deborah would not just be any judge. She would become a symbol of divine intervention in times of need. The weary and broken nation was about to witness the power of God in action. The days of suffering would give way to new hope, led by a woman who knew her strength came from the Lord. Deborah was not a conventional leader in Israel. While previous judges were known for their military skills, Deborah stood out as a prophetess and a woman of faith. She was called by God to lead in a time of great darkness. Her mission was clear: to guide the people of Israel and restore their covenant with God. From the very beginning, it was evident that her leadership came from a spiritual source, not from brute strength. Seated under the palm of Deborah, between Ramah and Bethel, she judged the people who came seeking wisdom and justice. There, in a simple place, far from the battlefields, God used her voice to guide the nation. The fact that a woman held such a position of authority in a patriarchal society was, in itself, a sign of God's special plan. He often chose the unlikely to accomplish his greatest works. Deborah had a deep connection with the Lord, something that inspired confidence in the people. They knew that her decisions were guided by God. She did not lead by the power of weapons, but by the power of her faith. When the people sought answers, it was Deborah's voice that echoed God's divine instructions. In times of confusion and fear, she was an anchor of stability, offering clarity. But her leadership did not stop at settling disputes. Deborah carried a powerful prophetic word that would change the destiny of Israel. She knew that deliverance was on the way and that it would be guided by God. While many were trapped in despair, Deborah had a clear vision of what needed to be done. And with that clarity, she prepared to lead the nation into an epic battle. Deborah also possessed unparalleled courage. She knew that for God's plan to be fulfilled, she would need to inspire those around her to follow his direction. The trust the people placed in her was a reflection of the trust she placed in God. Deborah was a woman of action, willing to obey at any cost, knowing that her obedience would lead to victory. With this courage and clarity, Deborah heard God's call to act. She did not hesitate to take the reins of a desperate situation. The people of Israel needed a leader, and Deborah was ready to take on that responsibility, knowing that with God by her side, nothing would be impossible. If you're inspired by Deborah's courage, comment the word faith below. Let's see how faith can change everything in our lives, just as it did for Israel. Deborah's leadership as a judge was unique in many ways. In ancient Israel, judges held a dual role. They were both spiritual and political leaders. For Deborah, her role as judge was rooted in her relationship with God. She wasn't just resolving disputes. She was leading the people back to their faith. Every decision she made was guided by divine wisdom, and the people recognized her authority because it came from the Lord. In a time when male leaders dominated, Deborah's leadership stood as a powerful testament to God's calling. She did not assert her authority by force or physical power, but through spiritual strength. Her wisdom and courage inspired those around her, particularly the men who would later follow her into battle. Israel needed more than a judge. They needed someone who could restore hope, and Deborah was that person. Deborah's leadership was a constant reminder that God chooses whom he pleases, regardless of gender or societal norms. Her role was not defined by her limitations, but by her faith. She broke through cultural barriers, proving that obedience to God was more important than fitting into society's expectations. Her ability to lead came from a deep well of spiritual insight, which allowed her to guide Israel through one of its darkest periods. As a judge, Deborah had the ability to make decisions that affected the entire nation. She was a symbol of justice, but more than that, she was a symbol of God's mercy. The people knew that when Deborah spoke, they were hearing the voice of God through her. This made her a powerful figure, one that not only resolved conflicts but also inspired spiritual revival among the Israelites. Under Deborah's leadership, the people began to see a glimmer of hope. Her presence as a judge gave them the confidence that they were not forgotten by God. Every ruling she made, every prophecy she gave, was a reminder that God had not abandoned them. It was a message of redemption and restoration, and it came at a time when Israel needed it the most. One day, Deborah received a clear message from God. The time had come for Israel to rise up against their oppressors. God had chosen Barak, a warrior from the tribe of Naphtali, to lead the battle. Deborah called for Barak and delivered the divine command. She boldly declared that God had already prepared the victory, and Sisera's mighty army would be defeated. The message was clear. God had a plan, and he was about to intervene. Deborah's prophecy was not just a prediction. It was a call to action. She told Barak to gather 10,000 men and lead them to Mount Tabor. It was here that God would deliver Sisera and his army into their hands. Her words were filled with certainty, but for Barak, this task seemed overwhelming. After years of oppression, the thought of confronting Sisera's iron chariots with a smaller and less equipped army was daunting. However, Deborah's faith was unwavering. She knew that God's promises never fail, and she reassured Barak that victory was certain because it was God's battle, not theirs. She reminded him that God had already seen the outcome and that their only job was to obey. Her boldness gave Barak a sense of hope, but he still hesitated. He would only agree to go if Deborah went with him, recognizing that her presence was a symbol of God's favor. Without hesitation, Deborah agreed to accompany Barak into battle. However, she also warned him that because of his reluctance, the honor of defeating Sisera would not go to him but to a woman. This prophecy would later prove to be both unexpected and profound. Deborah's bold declaration of victory was a turning point for Israel. The people began to prepare for the fight ahead, knowing that their future was in the hands of God. This moment highlighted Deborah's role not just as a judge but as a prophetess who understood the divine plan. Her ability to see beyond the immediate challenges into the bigger picture gave her the courage to inspire others. She wasn't leading by military might, but by faith in the God who had already promised victory. The people rallied behind her because they trusted her connection to the Lord. As the prophecy spread, hope began to stir among the Israelites. The thought of finally overthrowing Sisera and his army was no longer a distant dream. With Deborah's bold declaration, the people were ready to take the first steps toward their deliverance. Victory was not just possible. It was already declared by God through his chosen leader, Deborah. When Barak heard Deborah's prophecy, his reaction was a mix of faith and fear. He believed in Deborah's connection to God and the promise of victory, but the thought of leading an army against Sisera's iron chariots filled him with doubt. Barak was not a coward, but the magnitude of the task ahead seemed impossible. Israel's forces were no match for the Canaanites, and without the proper weapons, it felt like a death sentence. Barak's hesitation was understandable. The Canaanites had terrorized Israel for years, and confronting their military strength head-on seemed like an impossible task. But despite his fear, Barak had one condition. He would only go into battle if Deborah went with him. This wasn't just about her presence. It was about what she represented. Deborah was the voice of God, and Barak needed the assurance that God's favor was with them. Deborah's response was immediate and confident. She agreed to go with him into battle, but she warned Barak that because of his reluctance, the glory of the victory would not be his. Instead, it would be given to a woman. Her courage in the face of Barak's doubt was a reflection of her unwavering faith. Deborah was not concerned with receiving credit. She was focused on fulfilling God's plan for Israel's deliverance. While Barak needed Deborah's presence to give him confidence, Deborah's courage came directly from her trust in God. She didn't need an army or physical strength. Her power came from the assurance that God had already determined the outcome. This difference in mindset revealed much about both leaders. Barak's reluctance was based on human logic, while Deborah's courage was rooted in divine promise. Despite Barak's hesitation, the fact that he was willing to follow Deborah into battle demonstrated a level of trust in God's plan. His faith was growing, even if it wasn't as bold as Deborah's. Together, they would lead the people into a battle that would change the course of Israel's future. Deborah's courage would inspire Barak to step into his role, and together, they would see God's hand at work. As they prepared to face Sisera's army, it became clear that this would not be an ordinary battle. The odds were stacked against them, but Deborah's faith remained firm. She knew that with God's guidance, victory was already theirs. The partnership between Barak and Deborah, despite Barak's initial reluctance, would soon become a testimony of God's faithfulness in the face of overwhelming opposition. The day of battle arrived, and Barak, along with 10,000 men from the tribes of Naphtali and Zebulun, prepared to face Sisera's fearsome army. The odds were clearly in favor of the Canaanites, whose iron chariots and advanced military power had dominated Israel for years. Yet, despite their inferior resources, the Israelites had one thing that Sisera did not: God's promise of victory. Deborah's unwavering faith fueled their courage as they marched toward Mount Tabor. Sisera, confident in his military superiority, gathered his troops near the Kishon River, ready to crush the Israelites. With his 900 iron chariots, he believed the battle was already won. But Sisera underestimated the power of God. As the two armies approached, something unexpected happened. God intervened, sending a sudden, mighty storm. The rain turned the battlefield into a muddy trap, rendering Sisera's chariots useless in the heavy mud. The Israelites, who had no such disadvantage, seized the moment. Barak led his troops in a fierce charge down from Mount Tabor, catching Sisera's army off guard. The Canaanite soldiers, now stuck and unable to maneuver their chariots, were overwhelmed by the sudden attack. What once seemed like an unstoppable force had now become a helpless target. God's hand was clearly at work as the mighty Canaanite army was brought to its knees. In the chaos, Sisera abandoned his chariot and fled on foot, leaving his men behind. The once mighty commander was now running for his life, while his army was utterly destroyed. The Israelites pursued the Canaanites relentlessly, wiping out every soldier. The victory was swift and complete, just as Deborah had prophesied. It was a moment of triumph not just for Barak, but for all of Israel, who witnessed firsthand the power of God in action. Deborah's bold prophecy had come to pass. The seemingly impossible had become a reality. Sisera, who had terrorized Israel for so long, was now a fugitive, his once invincible army crushed by God's intervention. The battle had been won, not by military strength, but by divine intervention, and the people of Israel rejoiced in their newfound freedom. This victory was a turning point for Israel. The defeat of Sisera's army marked the beginning of a new era, one in which the Israelites would no longer live in fear of their oppressors. Deborah's leadership and faith had led them to victory, but the story was not over yet. Sisera still needed to be dealt with, and another unexpected hero was about to enter the scene. As Sisera fled from the battlefield, desperate and exhausted, he sought refuge in the tent of Jael, the wife of Heber the Canaanite. Jael's family had a neutral relationship with the Canaanites, and Sisera assumed her tent would be a safe place to hide. Jael welcomed him inside, offering him milk to drink and a place to rest. Exhausted from the battle and believing he was safe, Sisera quickly fell asleep. But Jael had other plans that would change the course of history. Jael's actions were bold and unexpected. Though Sisera was a guest in her tent, she knew that Israel's freedom was at stake. With courage and determination, Jael took a tent peg and a hammer and approached the sleeping commander. In one swift and decisive move, she drove the peg through Sisera's head, killing him instantly. Sisera, the mighty commander of the Canaanite army, was defeated not on the battlefield, but in the quietness of a tent by a woman no one expected. This act of courage shocked everyone. Jael, who had no ties to Israel's army, became the unexpected hero of the day. Her boldness was a testament to the way God often uses unlikely people to accomplish his purposes. Just as Deborah had prophesied, the glory of defeating Sisera would go to a woman, not a soldier, but a seemingly ordinary woman with extraordinary courage. Jael's actions were not just an act of war, but an act of faith. She understood the significance of her decision and recognized the opportunity to play a role in Israel's deliverance. By killing Sisera, she ensured that Israel's enemies would be completely defeated. Her actions marked the final blow in the battle for freedom and would be remembered as one of the most daring acts in Israel's history. When Barak arrived at Jael's tent, he found Sisera already dead. The prophecy had been fulfilled in a way no one could have predicted. Barak's pursuit of Sisera had ended, not by his own hand, but by the hand of Jael. The victory was complete, and Israel's greatest oppressor was gone. This moment solidified the triumph of Deborah's leadership and the fulfillment of God's promise. Jael's story is a reminder that God often works through unexpected people in unexpected ways. Her bold act became a pivotal moment in Israel's history, showing that true courage comes not from physical strength, but from trusting in God's plan. The defeat of Sisera brought peace to the land, and Jael's name would forever be linked with the victory that God had promised through Deborah. With Sisera defeated and his army destroyed, Israel experienced a long-awaited victory. The Canaanites, who had terrorized the Israelites for over 2 decades, were now powerless. The battle had not only freed Israel from oppression, but also restored their faith in God's protection. Deborah's leadership had led them through a dark period, and now, the people could finally see the light of peace on the horizon. The aftermath of the battle was marked by a renewed sense of unity among the tribes of Israel. The Israelites had witnessed God's hand at work in a miraculous way, and their hearts were turned back to him. Deborah's influence extended beyond the battlefield. She became a symbol of hope and faithfulness. Her guidance helped the nation return to its covenant with God, and under her leadership, the people experienced a season of spiritual revival. For Israel, this victory was more than just the defeat of an enemy. It was a spiritual restoration. The fear that had gripped the nation for so long was lifted, and the people began to rebuild their lives. The land, which had been ravaged by war and oppression, was now at peace. The Canaanites no longer posed a threat, and the Israelites could finally live without the constant fear of attack. Deborah's role in bringing about this peace was undeniable. She had not only prophesied the victory, but had also led Israel with wisdom and courage. The people saw her as a judge and a prophetess, but also as a protector. Her leadership during this time of peace solidified her place in Israel's history as one of the most influential judges. She had accomplished what seemed impossible and had done so through unwavering faith in God. This period of peace lasted for 40 years, a rare and precious time for Israel. The people could focus on rebuilding their communities and their relationship with God. Deborah continued to serve as a judge during this time, ensuring that justice was upheld and that the people remained faithful to their covenant with the Lord. Her influence would leave a lasting impact on the nation, one that would be remembered for generations. The peace that followed Sisera's defeat was a direct result of Deborah's obedience to God's call. Through her leadership, Israel had been delivered from oppression and given a new beginning. This time of peace was a blessing from God, a reward for their faithfulness, and a testament to what could happen when the nation trusted in His plan. After the great victory over Sisera and the Canaanite army, Deborah and Barak led Israel in a song of triumph. This song, known as the Song of Deborah, is recorded in the book of Judges and stands as one of the oldest and most powerful songs of praise in the Bible. It was not just a celebration of military success, but a deep and profound expression of gratitude to God for His deliverance and faithfulness. Deborah's song was filled with vivid imagery, recounting the events of the battle and highlighting God's divine intervention. She praised the Lord for stirring the hearts of Israel's leaders and for the bravery of the people who rose up to fight against their oppressors. The song painted a picture of God as a mighty warrior whose power turned the tide of battle. It was a reminder to all of Israel that their victory had come solely from the hand of God. The song also paid tribute to those who played key roles in the battle, including Jael, the unexpected hero who killed Sisera. Deborah honored Jael's courage, calling her most blessed of women for her decisive and brave action. Through the song, Deborah showed how God often works through unlikely people to fulfill His purposes. It was a celebration not just of military might, but of faith and obedience to God's call. At the heart of the song was a message of divine justice. Deborah contrasted the fate of the enemies of God with the blessings of those who trust in Him. Sisera, who had once been feared throughout the land, was now a defeated and disgraced enemy. Meanwhile, Israel, once oppressed and afraid, had been lifted up by the power of God. Deborah's song reminded the people that when they follow God, no enemy is too great to overcome. The Song of Deborah was also a call to future generations to remember the deeds of the Lord. It was a way of preserving the memory of God's deliverance and ensuring that Israel would not forget the lessons learned from the battle. Through this song, Deborah emphasized the importance of remembering God's faithfulness and passing down the stories of His works to future generations. Deborah's song was more than just a reflection on the past. It was a powerful declaration of God's sovereignty and a reminder that He is always in control. This triumph and praise unified the people of Israel and solidified Deborah's legacy as a leader who not only delivered them from oppression but also led them back to a place of worship and reverence for God. Deborah's legacy extended far beyond her time as a judge. She became a symbol of faith, courage, and leadership in Israel's history. Her story is remembered not only for the victories she helped secure, but for the spiritual revival she inspired. In a time when Israel was lost and oppressed, Deborah's faith and obedience to God led the nation back to hope. Her legacy as a leader is one of unwavering trust in God's plan, no matter the odds. Deborah's leadership was unique because it transcended the traditional roles of women in her society. As a judge, prophetess, and military leader, she broke through cultural barriers and proved that God's call knows no limits. She was a reminder to the people of Israel that God often chooses the unexpected to do His greatest work. Through her, the people learned that faith, not physical strength, was the key to true victory. The peace that followed Deborah's leadership was a testament to her wisdom and God's guidance. For 40 years, Israel experienced rest from their enemies, a rare period of stability and prosperity. Deborah's influence helped establish a foundation of faith and justice that lasted throughout this time. Her ability to lead with both spiritual authority and practical wisdom made her one of the most respected judges in Israel's history. Deborah's legacy also lived on through the stories and songs that were passed down through generations. The Song of Deborah became a lasting reminder of God's deliverance and her role in it. Her courage inspired future leaders, and her story became an example of what can happen when a nation puts its trust in God. The lessons from her life continued to shape Israel long after her time as judge had ended. In addition to her leadership in battle, Deborah's role as a prophetess set her apart. Her ability to hear and speak the word of God gave her an authority that no earthly ruler could match. She led not just with strategy, but with a divine purpose, ensuring that Israel would follow God's will. Her spiritual insight was key to the nation's victory, and her reliance on God's promises became a model for all who followed. Deborah's story is a reminder that true leadership is found in faith and obedience to God. She demonstrated that even in the darkest times, God can raise up a leader who will lead his people to victory and peace. Her legacy remains a powerful testament to the impact one person's faith can have on an entire nation. To this day, Deborah is remembered as one of Israel's greatest judges, a woman of faith who led her people to victory and peace. Deborah's story teaches us that true leadership comes from faith and obedience to God. She wasn't chosen for her strength or her military skills, but for her unwavering trust in God's plan. Her courage inspired an entire nation to rise up, and through her leadership, Israel found victory and peace. But Deborah's legacy doesn't just belong to the past. It speaks to us today. It reminds us that when we face overwhelming challenges, God is still in control, and he can raise up leaders in the most unexpected ways. As you reflect on Deborah's life, consider the areas in your own life where God is calling you to step out in faith. Like Deborah, you may feel inadequate or unlikely to make a difference, but God often chooses the unlikely to do the extraordinary. Will you trust in his plan, even when the odds are against you? Let Deborah's story encourage you to take that step of faith, knowing that with God, victory is already promised. Lord, we thank you for the example of Deborah, a woman of faith who trusted you in the most difficult circumstances. We ask that you give us the same courage and wisdom to face the challenges in our lives. Help us to step out in faith, trusting that you have a plan for us. May we be leaders in our families, communities, and wherever you place us, following your guidance just as Deborah did. We ask for your strength and guidance in all we do. In Jesus' name, amen.